My name is Michele Banks. I'm an artist inspired by science. I mostly make paintings in watercolor or ink that incorporate scientific concepts and images to explore ideas of growth and connection. The first thing that everyone asks when they see my art is, "Are you a scientist?" And no, I'm not. Yes, my paintings are full of bacteria, viruses, and cells, but art is my career, and I have no background in science at all. I took a roundabout route to Sci-Art. When I started painting about 20 years ago, I was doing abstract watercolors with a lot of wet in wet, which is a technique where you lay down a wash of color and then add a second color while the first one is still wet. This creates a lot of cool patterns because of the way the fluid interacts with the substrate. I was doing this instinctively, but when people saw my paintings, they told me that they were full of fractal patterns, or that they looked like things under a microscope. I thought that was incredibly cool, so I looked up images of dividing cells and started making paintings more specifically inspired by mitosis. It's still one of my favorite things to paint, because it's really the basis of life itself, and what could be more meaningful than that? From there, it was a natural step to explore the microbial world. I find it endlessly fascinating that there's this vast, invisible world all around us and within us, and that viruses and bacteria are so tiny but have so much power. If we somehow managed to eradicate all bacteria and viruses tomorrow, life on Earth would cease. I've been lucky to make some connections with microbiologists working on groundbreaking projects, including the Human Microbiome Project, the Home Microbiome Project, and the Long-Term Evolution Experiment, which has followed the evolutionary patterns of thousands of generations of E. coli. I've created art inspired by all of these. In 2014, I created an exhibition with two other artists at the AAAS in Washington, called Voyage of Discovery. We looked at the effects of climate change in the Arctic on many levels, from the geographic to the microscopic. On the micro side, I took inspiration from a line by Carl Zimmer. To see the starkest evidence of the feedback between global warming and microbes, you need only travel to the Arctic. This mixed media installation, Culture Dishes, was inspired by the changes in Arctic microbes in soil and water caused by warming. It's just one example of how tiny microorganisms can cause shifts on a huge scale. Of course, 6 years later, we got an even bigger reminder of that when a coronavirus turned the whole world upside down. Over the course of 3 pandemic years, I got better and better at painting coronaviruses. Now I think it's kind of a niche skill for me. I love working with scientific images in water media for 2 main reasons. First is the fact that both ink and watercolor naturally create patterns similar to the ones found in nature. Second, the transparency of water media allows me to hint at things happening under the surface, which of course is what scientists are doing too, peering under the surfaces of life. A key decision for me when deciding to make a piece is the medium. I usually either work in watercolor on paper or ink on UPO, which is a sheet of polypropylene. If I want things to be clear and bright, a little more of a textbook style, I'll work in watercolor, where I can more precisely convey shapes and details. But we know that science isn't always clear and bright. If I want to emphasize fluidity, movement, the messiness of growth or mutation, then I will probably work in ink. Ink, as I use it with lots of water, is very hard to control, but if you're lucky, you end up with amazing patterns. So I guess it has that in common with science too. I don't so much think of science as the subject of my art, so much as the vocabulary of my art. It's an approach to looking at how things are connected. While one artist might use the motifs of families or armies to explore connections or conflict, I might use images of bacteria, either cooperating, invading, or changing their tactics through evolution. You don't have to work in a lab to appreciate my paintings, but my work definitely appeals to people who are interested in science. For scientists, They can take pleasure in seeing the things that they've worked hard on and that are often difficult to explain, expressed in a beautiful and meaningful way. For non-scientists, I hope my work makes them think a little about how we share the world with microorganisms, and that humans affect microbes as much or more as they affect us in so many ways. I don't think I can put it any better than Charles Darwin. There is a grandeur in this view of life, with its several powers having been originally breathed into a few forms or into one, and that whilst this planet has gone cycling on according to the fixed law of gravity, from so simple a beginning, endless forms most beautiful and most wonderful have been and are being evolved.